The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and thank you for joining us this afternoon. Shortly I'm going to be handing you over to John Dawson, who'll be giving us a presentation on building and bidding consortia. Firstly, before we start, I'd like to let you know that all the slides that you see on screen today will be sent to you via email, so you can have a look at them again in your own time. We're also going to be having a number of question and answer sessions throughout this presentation. If you look to the right hand side of your screen, you'll see that there is a small control panel, and at the bottom of half of this control panel is a place for you to type your questions and send them to us. We'll be pausing to answer some of those questions throughout the presentation, so we do encourage you to send some questions in to us. We're also going to be running a few polls throughout the presentation, and this is a chance for you to give our speakers some feedback. So I'm now going to hand you over to John for the first part of the presentation. John, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Luke, and welcome along, everyone. It's good to see people showing an interest in this subject, and today's webinar is about, as Luke said, building bidding consortia, and we're going to cover quite a range of stuff. There's quite a lot we could get through on the subject, but we've got an hour, so we'll try and cover a broad range of things when it comes to building bidding consortia. There will be an opportunity to ask questions throughout. If we don't cover anything today, we'll be happy to get back in touch with you offline, as it were, and send you any resources you might find useful on the topic as well. Okay, well, we'll move on to look at the outline of the session and what we're going to look at today. Just to mention that Locality has been working with our members around the country on partnership working, collaboration for a long time, and increasingly on consortia. We've been working with members in Bradford, in Oldham, in Leeds and in the West Midlands on looking at consortia options for public service delivery, and it's something that I think is going to be increasingly popular, and people are interested in the different ways of doing it and whether or not they work and how you actually get to a stage where you can be in a good position to bid for contracts. So that's a lot of that input has been put into today's webinar, and one of that experience goes into today's webinar as well. But today we're just going to look at broadly three areas: why you might look at bidding consortia, why developing a consortium might be the option for you. We'll have a look at some common structures and what bidding consortia look like, and some of the do's and don'ts when it comes to bidding consortia. And finally, the how of bidding consortia. We will look at how you might go about building bidding consortia. So we'll look at whether, as an individual organisation, getting involved with consortia and more partnership working is for you. We'll look at how you find out more information about partners, and finally we'll look at ways that you go about building a bidding consortium and actually making it happen. Okay, so to start off, the first section we'll have a look at why bidding consortia might be the answer. Commonly, a lot of people are looking at it now. Is it the best thing since sliced bread? Well, not necessarily, but it is a viable option for a lot of organisations out there. It is an attractive option, but you do have to go into it with your eyes open. There are a lot of things to be aware of when it comes to developing bidding consortia. It does take a lot of time, it does take a lot of investment often, so it's just an option that exists, but it is a viable and good option, and we're starting to see consortia as a way of operating now that it is working successfully. So it may not be the best thing since sliced bread, but hopefully it is a useful option. And today will be about understanding a bit more about how they work, what they look like, and how you go about building them. So just briefly to cover language, consortia, consortiums, partnership working, joint ventures. When we speak to people about consortia, even when we're working with organisations and developing consortia, often you find that people sitting around the table have very different views in their heads about what they mean by consortium or consortia working, and often, even after a few meetings, people still aren't necessarily on the same page. It's a word that's commonly used to describe lots of different models and structures and ways of working. We're going to use it quite loosely today, and it does cover all these things all these words in front of you today, but it is about more than one organisation working collaboratively, generally around public service delivery, around bidding for contracts, and under different structures and models. And we're going to look at different structures and models later on. But just to be aware that when we use Consortium today, we aren't necessarily talking about just one model, and we'll cover a bit more of that later on. Okay, before we get into the meat and bones of this session, we thought it would be a good idea to just gauge the people who are attending the webinar today, the interest in the webinar, and really what your reasons were for choosing this session today. And we'd be really interested to see who's out there and what your views are and why you're interested in bidding consortia. So we're going to launch a poll. The next screen that you'll see on your computers will be a poll, and you'll have the opportunity to select one of the 4 options in front of you. So we would like to know what your reasons for choosing this session are, and the options are: I'm thinking about developing a consortium myself. I already am developing a consortium, you're already in the process of it. I already work in an established consortium, or finally, maybe you work in an infrastructure type role, you support others to do this. So 4 options there. Hopefully one of those will closely fit your interests. I'm just going to hand back to Luke now and ask him to launch the poll. So it should be coming up on your screens now. There we are, there's the poll. And if you're able to vote with your mouse and move your little pointer to the one that you want to vote for. Okay, we've got most votes have come in now. I'll just give you a few seconds longer. There's a few more votes coming in, and quite an interesting result here. Okay, I'll just give it a couple of seconds further. All right, we'll pause there. Thank you, Luke. So the results of the poll are quite an interesting result. Really, we've got a mixture of people who are thinking about developing a consortium, and we've got people who are supporting others to do this. So we've probably got more people that are supporting others to do this than thinking about developing a consortium. Interestingly, no one who's actually running an established consortium at the moment. But that's really useful to gauge the level of interest in the room today. Okay, great. So let's move on. So if we look at the context and why bidding consortia are increasingly talked about as an option, there's clearly been a massive change in public services and a massive change in external factors that are influencing people's interest in consortia working. Clearly there's been a huge squeeze on public sector finance, really filtered down to a local level. We've seen a real reduction in grant funding locally. Contracting has for a long time been on the increase, particularly under a more rigorous performance regime. There's been perceived economies of scale for a number of years, things like the work programme, massive scale, large contracting, even smaller, the more localised commissioning has been on quite a large scale. This perception that if you put out a larger contract, you can get more efficiencies and economies of scale, something which Locality ourselves have actually challenged in our diseconomies of scale work. But it is still an issue that is out there, so that has really led to a lot of organisations thinking about consortia working. Often a lot of Locality members are quite locally based, of a certain scale, not necessarily large enough to cover some of the bigger contracts that are out there, so consortia working seems like a viable option. We've had massive reforms to public services and massive changes to public services, including local government, which has changed massively. Even the people within local government have moved around a lot. If you think about the health world and the changes to the health sector, that is just one area where there's been huge changes and influencing how services are commissioned. There's been a large increase in outsourcing of services and a move, particularly encouraged by this government, that the public sector should be a commissioning sector that doesn't necessarily deliver services itself, which again gives impetus for some consortia working. It's been a long-term drive on improving outcomes, Definitely increased demand at a local level. Public services demand seems to be ever increasing, but the demographics that are related to that are changing as well. People talk about a perfect storm, a time bomb of increasing demographics and increasing demand. And again, an interest from the public sector in targeting resources more efficiently and more effectively. And consortia working can be an answer to a lot of these external factors. The government itself has done a lot of work to change public services, and their vision for public services has filtered down across the country, really. If you look at how public services are commissioned these days, even in the last 2, 3, 4 years, there's been huge changes. The public services reform agenda has led to a lot of those and really led to an increase in interest in consortia as an option, both by commissioners but also by local voluntary sector organisations. And equally, it's a changing picture for many third sector organisations that are out there. Increasingly, it's more competitive. Increasingly, there's more and more needs at a local level that aren't being met. There's an option to improve services, definitely a desire to improve services. People are grappling with things like payment by results and social finance. Equally, there are lots of new entrants into markets. We've seen a lot of private sector bodies successfully win a lot of public sector tenders, and increasingly third sector organisations are having to work with them. And increasingly tenders are over larger geographic areas, which necessitates levels of collaboration to be able to compete. So it's really a changing world, and consortia can be an answer to some of these changing situations that are out there that people face. It may not necessarily be the answer in all cases, but it gives an opportunity to work more collaboratively, to improve services. It gives an opportunity to help smaller organisations still remain part of public service delivery, still remain part of service delivery rather than being squeezed out. So it definitely does provide some options for organisations. Okay, let's have a quick look at what commissioners might be interested in and what their views are on what it is that they're looking for. It's hard to give mass generalisations about this, but there are definitely some trends. Increasingly, commissioners are under a lot of pressure to deliver efficiency savings and to improve services at the same time, something not necessarily particularly easy. Clearly, they want a single line of responsibility for any services that they do commission, which is a challenge for consortia working. They often and increasingly are looking to outsource some of the commissioning function. So instead of commissioning 10, 20 grant providers or even contracted providers, a lot of commissioners seem it to be attractive to just put out a tender, one larger tender for public services, and leave it up to the bidding market to decide how those tenders will look. The commissioners are definitely looking for certainty of quality of delivery throughout the supply chain. They really want to make sure that if partners are working together, that any weak partners will not be upsetting or impeding the quality and standards of delivery. They're definitely looking for competition on price, but strong risk management is a clear thing that they're looking for. If they're looking at a bid and they don't deem that it is a safe option to go with, then even if it's cheaper, even if it looks like it could be the better option, they will definitely think about that twice. What else are they looking at? Definitely pushing money to the front line for service delivery. In recent years, a big drive around social value, which should provide an opportunity for consortia working, particularly in our sector. Increasingly looking for inputs into service design, about rethinking services and influencing service design from the front end, from service users, and getting their perceptions into that. And clearly there's a drive towards outcomes against being prescriptive and deciding that they just want a certain number of outputs. So there's definitely options there that are driving what commissioners want that might push towards consortia working. Certainly consortia working can be an answer to some of those issues. So if we just pause there, I'm aware we've gone through quite a bit already, but there may be some questions that have arisen already. I'll hand back to Luke to see if any questions have come in. And if you do have any questions, do drop them into the box. Okay, Luke. Can't quite hear you at the moment, Luke.
Apologies there, you should be able to hear me now.
Thank you.
So I can see we have had a couple of questions come in. If you have got any questions that pop into your head, just put them in the box and I can feed them back to John. I can see the first one we've had here, John, is how do you vet the quality of partners in a consortium?
Okay, well that is a really important issue, and we'll come on to that a bit more later on. But if you're going into partnership with other organisations, you really do need to know that they're going to deliver. And whether that's through subcontracting arrangements, whether it's through performance management arrangements within the contract, you need to make sure that the other providers are delivering up to a quality specification. And some of that comes down to the due diligence that you do beforehand and understanding the history and the track record of the organisations that you're working with. If they have a history of not delivering, then you really need to think twice about getting into partnership arrangements with them.
And then the second question that's been sent in is, how long does it take to build a bidding consortium?
Okay, thank you, Luke. Well, it's a bit like the piece of string question, but the more complex your consortium and the more members you have involved, the longer it can take. We've seen examples where it can take up to 2 years, which is probably more the extreme end of the spectrum, but a full bidding consortium with multiple members, particularly large numbers of members, it can take a long time to do the due diligence, to understand about each other and also to build the trust across that partnership, and at the same time bid for contracts and successfully win and start delivering those contracts. So it shouldn't be thought of as a short-term solution, it really is a long-term option, and if you think also about the cycle of tenders coming out, that can and will necessitate how long it takes to deliver and develop that partnership.
That's all the questions we've had for the moment, but if I just remind the audience, if any questions do pop into your head, just pop them in the chat, in the questions box in the right hand side, and when we pause again, I shall feed those back to John. So back to you now, John.
Okay, thank you, Luke. Okay, so let's move on to what do they look like? What does a typical consortium look like? Well, organisations are typically used to working collaboratively and in partnership with other organisations. You'll see from this slide in front of you that collaboration can be very small scale with low intensity right up to much more intense collaboration across organisational boundaries. And when we're looking at consortia and consortia development, we are looking at the right-hand side of this slide here, and increasingly the more involved and the more in-depth the collaboration is and the more number of partners involved, you are looking at increased resources, difficulty, time, risk, energy to make that happen. Who might be involved? We are seeing now that some consortia and some delivery partnerships are involving third sector organisations, small and large, but also some with private sector, some with public sector organisations. So be prepared that you might have to work with a very diverse range of organisations and some who you possibly never worked with before. Okay, let's just move on to another quick poll and just gauge the perception in the room today of what is driving your interest in bidding consortia today. As of last time, the poll questions will launch very shortly, but the options are an upcoming specific opportunity, or there's no immediate opportunity but you're looking to position yourselves for the future, or finally it might be something else that's driving your interest in bidding consortia. So I'll just ask Luke to put that poll up on screen. If you can get your mice nice and active and point them at the answer you want to vote for. We've had a few votes come in. Just give you a couple of seconds longer. Cool, bit of movement there. Okay, thank you. So if we close the poll there, we can see that the majority is no immediate opportunities. People are just looking to position themselves for the future, possibly in light of many of the circumstances I mentioned earlier. About a third of you are looking for something else, so we'll try and pick that up in the questions. If you want to pop a question to the chat button, on the bottom right-hand side, please do. And one or two of you are looking for an upcoming specific opportunity. So again, it'd be interesting to see a bit more about that as well. But thank you. Broadly speaking, consortia working does come in two different types. One where you've got an immediate opportunity on the horizon and you're working up against that deadline. And secondly, a type where you're just looking to position yourselves for the future. There's not necessarily an immediate opportunity, but you think by working together the opportunities will appear. And in the second circumstance there, it may be that you're working with a broader range of partners to develop a consortium, and you might look at a wider range of opportunities. But a specific opportunity might lead to a consortium with fewer numbers of partners, just for that one contract. But we'll come on to that in a bit more detail. We're thinking about the success factors when it comes to consortium working. These really are a mixture of hard and soft factors. People often just try and do one of these and not the other. Just remember that it is really about getting both of these right. You can have as many agreements and paperwork and structures and processes in place as you like, but if the trust isn't there, if the personal relationships and chemistry aren't there, then you will struggle. Equally, if you're just doing it all on trust, you may have problems later down the line when people move on, or when some of that trust starts to be challenged by difficult working relationships or circumstances. So a real mixture of the two there, and important to make sure you get both of those right. Now, people often get quite obsessed by the different structures that are possible when it comes to consortia working, and it's important to have a structure. It's useful to have a structure because commissioners like clear lines of responsibility. They like to know who's accountable. They often want just one organisation that's accountable and that they can hold to the delivery of a contract. So it is useful to have a structure. It's also useful for the partners to know how the consortium is going to operate and who is accountable within the consortium. So structures are important, but we always say that the form should follow the function. So decide upon the function first before looking at the structures. But we'll have a quick look at the different models that are available. But again, don't get too bogged down in these, because these are something really to look at later on once you've thought about partnership working in more detail, I would say. But broadly speaking, an informal consortium model, an unincorporated consortium model, is one option where you may either have a managing provider and subcontractors, so that's where one of the partners provides some of the service delivery but also does the contract management, and then subcontracts on the work out to subcontractors. Secondly, within that you might have a slight variation where the organisation is a managing agent, so rather than actually deliver any of the contract, they just contract manage and deliver all the work out to subcontractors. And when we think about the work program again, some of the work program prime contractors were managing providers, some were managing agents. And the other real option there is a more formal incorporated option. So your two real options are incorporated and unincorporated, but the incorporated options, you might look at a formal consortium in response to a specific bid. Some people often call these joint venture companies, and that might be where 2, 3, 4, 5 organisations come together, form a new company for a specific contract. They deliver that contract and they walk away at the end of it. And finally there, the permanent consortium, a super provider, would be where you form a new company and you've got multiple organisations that come together and they will look to bid across a range of thematic areas, possibly over a range of geographic areas, and not all providers will necessarily be involved in each bid. But the intention is that the consortium has longevity and survives in the long term and picks up different contracts and divides up those bids as is most appropriate according to circumstances. So just looking at that in a bit more detail, we won't get too bogged down in these, but we're happy to provide any more information after today. If you look at a lead bidder model, I'm sure many of you will be familiar with this, a very simple mechanism really, but a contract is advertised, a group of organisations think they're interested and think they could deliver that particularly well. The lead bidder would be chosen, usually the one most likely to get through the procurement process and the strongest organisation at contract management, and they would subcontract certain bits out to other organisations. They would do the contract management themselves and they would deliver the contracts and the services. A different option, as mentioned previously, would be where you've got similar sort of circumstance about the consortium coming around, and coming into existence, but instead of just doing it through one organisation with the accountability and subcontracting it, one of the organisations would form a new special purpose vehicle that would bid for the contract itself as a new entity, and would then possibly subcontract some of the work to the partners, or then maybe it might be chupied over, for instance, but most of the work would be channeled through this new vehicle which the subcontractors and the other partners would be involved with. So just a slight differentiation there, and generally this would be a smaller number of organisations, and generally it would be just for a specific contract. At the end of the contract they would decide and review whether they want to continue that working arrangement. And the third option we're going to look at here is what we described earlier as a super consortium, or a long-standing consortium, but where you've got a larger number of members. We've seen examples of these where there's 30, 40, 50, 60 organisations that express an interest in joining the consortium. Some sort of quality control mechanism takes place, and a central hub is established, usually as a new company, but not always, and that is the bidding machine for all intents and purposes. It's the contract management machine. In the centre there, that does order delivery, and that is then subcontracted out as per whatever the requirements are for each tender. So you can see a couple of tenders here that have come in, and in the top right hand corner you'll see there are only 3 members that are going to be delivering on that contract, but it's all arranged by the central hub and the standing consortium. Now there are drawbacks and benefits to each model. This model, it can be quite an expensive model given that you have to service the central hub, but if you've got enough contracts coming through it, that maybe will be less of a problem. Equally, if you can have the central hub as quite a low maintenance operation, then that can be a cheaper way of doing it. Okay, let's just go back to people in the room today and gauge why it is that you're specifically looking at Consortia today and what it is that's driving you to this. We've got a couple of options here, and the options are whether you want to access larger contracts, whether you think you can improve services, whether you think you can access specialisms that you don't currently have, whether it's about expanding delivery, or maybe it's something else. So again, we're going to open a poll, and you'll see that coming up on your screens now, and if you can just hover your mouse, there it is. If you can hover your mouse over the one you want and press the one you want, it'd be good to just get an idea of what's driving your interest and what it is that you wish and hope to get out of consortium working. Okay, so the poll is open. I'm just going to take a look at the responses now, and okay, that's all of the votes that have come in now. Thank you. We'll ask Luke to close that poll, but thank you. We've got 2 joint winners there. It's between accessing larger contracts or something else, and a few of you are looking to improve services. But generally that is a common driver, that you're looking to access larger contracts where they've been aggregated locally. And that is something that consortia working is definitely an option for. Okay, maybe we can pick up the something else in the chat box at the bottom. Thank you for that. Okay, so we've got a brief moment here to ask and answer any questions that may have arisen as a part of that. I know we've covered quite a bit there. Unfortunately, it's got limited time today, but we could cover quite a lot. But if you do have a question you'd like to ask, please let Luke know.
So I can see here, John, Helen in our audience has sent in, I think it's more of a comment than a question, but if you could perhaps give a little feedback. And she's saying this is related to a time aspect of up to 2 years, and the problem that they find difficult is moving forwards without the tender information. So when it's only when they've only got 6 weeks to sort out, I think, if I'm understanding this correctly, they've tried to do that with groups where decommissioning is advised, but interest waned.
Okay, I'm not sure I'm quite getting the question there, but if Helen wants to clarify that in the box, we can do. It would be certainly interesting. Timescales are a real drive and a real issue when it comes to consortia working in collaboration. So it'd be good to unpick that a bit more if we're able to. Perhaps
that's one that we can pick up via email for you, Helen, and then The other question that's come in is, how do you choose who should be involved with each bid if you're working as a hub?
Okay, so we looked at the hub model there, and it's an interesting question. Really, you want the best people who are capable of delivering that bid. Now, you may have, with one of those super consortium models, more than one organisation that could claim to deliver on a particular contract. So you do have to have those awkward discussions, and prior to having those awkward discussions, you need some sort of process in place as to how decision making is going to take place. And to do that, often you need some sort of mapping to have taken place, so you know who is best placed to deliver those services and who's got the track record to do that. So it is a process of negotiation as to who will be involved in those bids, and with the possibility that people might slightly fall out and not necessarily be happy with the result of that. But hopefully, long term, they can remain within the consortium and deliver on contracts.
That's all the questions we've had again for this section, so I shall hand back to you, John.
Okay, thank you, Lee. Well, we'll move on, and this final section we'll look at how you go about building a bidding consortium and how you go about getting that into place. And three main areas we'll look at here. One, is it right for me? So as an individual organisation thinking about consortium working, there's a few of you in the room today. How do you decide whether or not you should go down that route? How do you know if a consortium is the right option, or maybe there are other options? Two, we'll look at how you gather intelligence, how you gather information about partners, and how you get enough information to make sure that consortium is operating with the best information available. And finally, we'll look at some sort of tricks of the trade, some ingredients for building the consortium and making it get over various hurdles and making it work. Okay, so firstly, as an individual organisation looking at increased consortium work, risk is a big thing to think about. It's a big thing to assess individually as each organisation and as a consortium as a whole, but as trustees of an individual organisation, you should think, is consortium working something we want to get involved with? Partnership working collaboration, it's all good, many benefits, but there are and can be drawbacks, and you need to be aware of those. One organisation we've been working with in Bradford was saying that their trustees have, rightly so, asked a lot of questions. Why should we be going down this route? Can't we do it on our own? Going to take a lot of time to do this, and a lot of your time as a CEO to drive this forward. So be prepared for those difficult questions, and assessing the risks early on is absolutely worth doing. Be prepared that there may be some sort of mission drift. Make sure that if you are looking at consortia working, that it's related to your purposes and why you exist to keep you on track. It can be very easy to get sidelined by attractive contracts or tenders that are out there but aren't actually that related to what you do. It can be easy to get sidetracked by the nitty-gritty of consortium development and take your eye off the ball of the day job, which is very difficult. Clearly, we mentioned earlier that some consortia can take a lot of time to develop, but also they can be fairly resource intensive, particularly over the long term. It can be a lot of time to do it, but also you might need investment to get the consortium up and running. You might also need investment throughout the supply chain and to build the capacity of smaller members. It takes a lot of commitment and energy to drive a consortium forward. It's easy to hold an initial meeting of interested organisations. Once you start getting bogged down in detail, that's where some people who aren't particularly detail-driven about how the processes of the consortium might work or how the structure might look, that's where some people can lose energy and enthusiasm. So you do need a good core of people who are really committed to making it work. And across partnership with multiple organisations, inevitably there will be some organisations with less commitment than yourselves, and you do have to prepare yourself that maybe you'll be doing a bit more paddling in the boat than others. Equally, you might be on the other side of that. Real reputational risk, hopefully this is quite low, but if you get into partnership with an organisation that fails to deliver, that may impact on your own brand, on your own organisation. So you have to be prepared that the organisations you're working with, you can trust that they are likely to deliver. Equally, if you're the lead contractor, you'll be responsible for delivering that contract. If you can't deliver it because partners haven't delivered, that will impede upon your ability to tender for future contracts. So do make sure you assess the reputational risk clearly. Could be financial risks, again, if you're the lead contractor as well. If a consortium bid goes in and you're leading that and partners don't deliver, especially if there's a payment by results element of the contract, you may find yourself with financial problems there related to the contract. It does and can change the relationship between organisations and partners that you might work with. You might find that actually you're moving into much more of a contractual relationship with partners and other organisations. It might be something you're not particularly happy with, and it will change the dynamic between yourself and other organisations. So you have to make sure that that's something you want to get into. And on top of that, really, particularly if you're the lead contractor, or if you're a major contractor within one of the supply chains within a consortium, performance management is a crucial issue. You need to make sure that the contract is delivering, and that may lead to tough decisions and tough questions and tough discussions with partners who perhaps aren't delivering up to the same standard or quality as yourselves. And it may be that you have to have discussions that you wouldn't really like to have with partners or organisations that exist for good social purposes, but actually you have to hold them to account, and that can again lead to changing relationships. So do assess the risks individually as an organisation before getting into consortia working, but don't overplay them, particularly at the early stage before you're bidding for contracts, and the risks are generally not necessarily going to be massive. It's worth being on the same page as to what it is that's driving your interest in consortium working and what's driving other partners' interest in consortium working. We touched on this a little bit earlier, but it's worth thinking about what's driving you to consortium working, and it will influence the shape and the design of the consortium that you look to develop. It may be that there are fewer grants, it may be that you see an opportunity to improve specific contracts that are coming up. It may be that you can't do a contract on your own because you don't have the specific skills or resources required. But do have a think about what it is that's driving your interest in consortium working. The crucial thing here is around adding value to a consortium. So knowing what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are. Sometimes this is referred to as giving and getting, but knowing what it is that you're really good at and what it is that you would actually hope to get out of a consortium. So what is it that you currently lack that you need to add to your offer? And hopefully if you've got an idea of what it is that you would like to get from a consortium or from partnership working, you might look at partners who would be able to cover that. And through good intelligence gathering, you could identify relevant partners who would be able to add to your bid. Really, you want partners who are going to add value to any bid that you put in through a consortium approach. You don't really want partners who aren't going to add value. Now, throughout even the early stages of consortium development, but even throughout the whole process of developing a bidding consortium and later on, once it's up and running, you need to get yourself a big pair of binoculars, but you need to be aware of the opportunities that exist for the consortium. What are the opportunities that are out there for consortium development? It's really about building up the business case and making sure that it stacks up. If contracts aren't getting bigger, if there is little driver for collaboration or greater consortia working, you do have to think whether it's the right option to be looking at. Throughout the process as well, keeping an eye on opportunities is vital, it's important. It will make sure that people stay and remain interested in the consortium. If people don't see that there are vital opportunities coming up, then they won't necessarily remain interested or motivated in the consortium. Okay. as well as making sure that there's a justifiable and recognisable business case for the consortium, you need to know that there's the right people involved, and that's externally and internally. It's worth, throughout the process, opening discussions with relevant stakeholders, talking to commissioners, what it is that they're looking for. Are they receptive to the option of a consortium? Are they interested in greater consortium working? Some commissioners are very keen on consortium working, others need a lot more convincing. So it's worth opening those discussions at an early stage, and that will influence the opportunities that are out there, will influence the business case as well and help that to stack up. And at some point you need to start raising the profile of the consortium and positioning it as a viable deliverer of services at a local level. And equally, you need a process of partner mapping. You need to know who you're involved with. Often consortia development, some partners know each other very well. Others, when it comes to a bidding consortium, don't necessarily know all the partners as well as they might hope, particularly when it's a larger scale consortium and there's multiple partners. We've been working with developing consortia in Leeds in the West Midlands, and where you've got, in both cases, more than 10 organisations, it's good that the organisations get to know each other, because when you've got that many organisations, they know of each other, but they don't know of each other in depth. So it is a process of due diligence, trust based on openness and knowledge, really good principles to establish from the beginning, but building trust is a process that you have to develop throughout the process of it, and it's something that's really important. And the final point there, the more in-depth the partnership, the greater the mapping. So if you're looking for real in-depth partnership working, if you're looking for a consortium that's going to be bidding for lots of contracts with multiple partners, you do need good information and good knowledge of who those partners are, what their track record is, what they deliver, what their reach is, what their quality standards are. There's a lot of information that it's worth picking up and finding out. And this process of due diligence, understanding and knowing who your partners are, a couple of, about 8 or so areas on the screen in front of you here. It's good to know whether their values fit with your values. Hopefully they would, but there could be clashes there if they don't. Have a think about the personalities and the leadership of that organisation. Are they moving in the same direction that you would like to move in? What is the expertise of that organisation? What is their broad experience? What is it that they're bringing to the table that will help the consortium as a whole? It's good to map that in detail, and we'll show you a way in a minute how we've been doing that with consortia around the country. It's a good idea to gauge what the size is of that organisation and what its capacity is. We've had organisations join consortia where they're very small with limited capacity, and others where they're very large, some with lots of capacity for contributing to the consortium, others with fairly limited capacity. So it just depends. The track record and reputation is important to know. The geographic coverage, very useful. Often that might be more neighbourhood based, and contracts coming out might be more city based or county based. So have a think how that fits together and how that pieces together. If you're all based within the same geographic area, very close together, again that might be an issue. It's good to understand the finances of organisations. If you're going into partnership with an organisation that's got very ropey finances, that could be an issue long term. And you'll need to know what their contract readiness is, so what their professional and technical capabilities are as an organisation. How good are they at bidding? What professional standards do they have? All the things that would get you through a pre-qualification questionnaire. Well, across the partnership, which organisations have the information on that? So this level of intelligence gathering, you could split it across 3 areas, but the contract readiness, their general experience of procurement, and the organisational information, really worth collecting and gathering. You'll need to have a think about what the pre-qualification questionnaire information is that the organisations hold, and gathering that centrally. So have a think of maybe what the range of the organisations you're working with is. So you might have organisations there with a turnover of say 45,000 and one with a turnover of 245 million. Now that's quite an extreme case, but that was one consortium that we were working with, and that was a large national charity that was a member of the consortium, and a much smaller locally delivered organisation with only 1.5 staff members. So great to build the knowledge of who is involved and what that information is to complete the pre-qualification questionnaire. And then finally you'll be at some stage having to complete an invitation to tender, so mapping what the areas of specialisms are, what the service areas that each organisation does will be really important when it comes to responding to tenders quickly and promptly. So this is just one matrix that we've developed, and this is only a snapshot of it. It's far longer and in more depth than this really. A series of matrices that we've developed mapping partners' specialisms and what they currently deliver and provide, including where they deliver it, and areas that are specialisms and areas that are just general broad outcomes or broad areas of interest. This is one around the invitation to tender information and building that picture. But we've also got similar matrices for pre-qualification questionnaire information and harvesting that at a central level so that you can get a good idea as the consortium what the partners are capable of delivering and what they can bring to the supply chain. Okay, so I'm just going to go back to Luke now. We've got, I think this is the final poll for the day, but we're going to ask what are your current barriers to building bidding consortia, and get an idea of what is preventing you at the moment, or what some of the things you're struggling with is at the moment. And we would like to know whether that is about finding the right partners, whether it's about finding the right opportunities, whether it's finding the investment, or perhaps it's the knowledge, the skills, the tools to make it happen. Okay, so I'm going to hand you over to Luke, and Luke's going to open the poll shortly. Okay, there's the poll, it's just popped up. And a few more votes coming in. I think someone's changed their votes there. Okay, most of you have voted. Give you a couple of seconds further. Okay, we've got all the votes coming there. Thank you, everyone. Real lead there for finding the investment for the consortium and finding the right knowledge, skills and tools to make it happen. Okay, really important things. And a couple there about finding the right opportunities, which is an interesting point. Some consortia have developed where they've got everything in place very quickly. They've sat there, but they haven't found that any contracts have come out that have been appropriate for the consortium. And as I said, it is a real long-term option, so don't expect consortia to necessarily, particularly large consortia, turn around results instantly. But in the long term, you would hope that they could influence commissioners and offer an attractive proposition. But finding the investment is a big issue. Hopefully, with the increase in social investment that is out there at the moment, that is something that is going to become a bit easier to find and to uncover. Presumably, that's around finding the investment for developing the consortium and maybe cash flowing it for things like payment by results contracts. Knowledge, skills, and tools to make it happen. Yeah, that's the real thing. And if you can bring in some external expertise, is always useful to help build that consortium. Okay, so a thing to consider, and something that has become very apparent in the work we've been carrying out with our members, you can't really get around the laws of group development. The classic thing around forming, storming, norming, performing, it's a bit cheesy, it's kind of management speak, but actually you see it unfold when you're working with groups that often, particularly where you've got a large number of organisations coming together, they don't necessarily know each other that well, do expect to have to probably go through that process at one stage or another. And don't be necessarily afraid of the storm. The storm could be a good thing. It could help bond the organisations together. It could help the making of the consortium. But just to be aware that when you're going into consortia development and bidding consortia, you probably are going to go through a series of negotiation, a series of building trust and understanding of each other, and those laws of group development are likely to kick in at one point or another. Okay, we'll pause there and see if any questions have come in, Luke.
So, yep, we've had another question come in, and this one's from Amanda, and she's asking, Have you known of a situation where one of the supply chain could play a role as a mediator, or should this be only the lead organisation or an external organisation?
Okay, so presumably where one of the supply chain could, as a mediator, presumably that's as part of contract delivery or deciding who would be as part of a supply chain, I would imagine. Not really as one of these smaller organisations, perhaps in the supply chain. I would have thought someone external might be a better mediator in those circumstances. You could, as part of any consortium agreement, decide how mediation is going to take place. You could do that through a subgroup of the consortium who mediates between those disputes. I think you'd have to make sure that any organisation that's part of the consortium is acting independently and not in their own interest, but in the interest of the consortium. So I think that needs digging into a bit more as to what the best option there is.
And we will get one of our advice team to get back to you after this session as well, so that can be discussed more. But I'm just aware of time, so I'm just going to hand back to you, and we'll pick up any final questions in the very last section. So back to you, John.
Okay, great. Thank you, Luke. Well, we've got one more section for questions coming up, so hopefully we'll cover anything there. And just in this final few minutes, we'll have a look at the building process, which can involve complexity. It can, as we said, involve a lot of time. If you've got timescale, an immediate timescale on the horizon, then you have to move quite quickly with these things, and maybe you have to shortcut and short-circuit some of the things around trust building and around getting all the processes in place. But you'd have to be aware that that may cause issues later on. And as I mentioned, it may be worth getting some external support, some external facilitation in to help with your processes. So if we just look at how you build a bidding consortium, these are some of what you might call ingredients, or we've called here cogs to make it happen. But these are really just some of the areas you need to consider and some of the things that you need to get in place so that you can have a consortium that's in a position to be smoothly operating, but also in a position to be an attractive proposition to commissioners, which is really, at the end of the day, what you need to be aiming for. We're hoping by this stage, this box in green, you've found the right partners. Maybe there's still a few blurred edges as to one or two organisations that are lukewarm and they may want to come in later. But we'll just, hopefully this will work. Okay, we'll look at we'll look at a few of these in a bit more detail. But developing the vision and the purpose, you'd think would be quite clear, quite simple. We've worked with consortia where this actually does take quite a bit of time. It's not everyone's cup of tea working on vision, mission, aims, what's an aim, what's a mission, what the difference between them is. So not everyone is necessarily sharing the level of enthusiasm for that. But really important that the consortium has clear vision and purpose about it. If there's no real purpose for the consortium, then you need to think why you're going down that route. Formal agreements are really useful. You might want a light touch formal agreement early on as you're developing the consortium. A lot of consortia then later on, further down the line, get everything wrapped up and they get a much more detailed partnership agreement in place. Just some of the possible headings for a partnership agreement in front of you on the screen here, but you could have a think later on about that in more depth. We've got templates we could send you for a more detailed partnership agreement, but it depends how involved you are at that stage of the process. But as mentioned throughout, formal agreements are as useful as the softer things like trust and personal chemistry and relationships. Now, trust is important, and if you're working with organisations you don't necessarily know, how do you help build that trust? Well, often people fall back on and rely on partnership agreements and contracts as a way of underpinning that, but it is really important that trust is built throughout the process, and that often can take time. That may be a process of a series of meetings, it may be informal meetings. One of the consortia that we're working with has developed that by meeting actually weekly and using it as a almost peer support network to build that trust and understanding of each other's situations and circumstances, so that they do trust each other when it comes to delivering together. But your reputation and brand, as it says, is at stake. So it's very important. Resources can be key. A lot of you have said investment is an issue that you're looking at, and that is one of the barriers. Hopefully with an increase in social investment that's out there, then that will get things moving a little bit in that direction. But it's not all about money. A lot of it is about time and having the dedication and the time to spend developing consortia. You do need ongoing commitment. You do need quite a bit of administration, of paperwork, of developing policies, the procedures, the processes. And it may well be that you need resources at some point to build the capacity of smaller members who perhaps aren't in a position to be a part of many of the supply chains, but you would like them to be in due course, and you feel that it's worth having them as part of the consortium and as part of the offer. Perhaps they've got something unique, maybe geographic or a particular specialism to add to the consortium, but they may not necessarily be totally contract ready yet. So you may well need resources to help them get there. The business case, we've said this a few times, but really it does have to stack up. There does need to be opportunities. There's no point spending a lot of time and money and energy building a consortium if there are not going to be any contracts that come through that the consortium can deliver. And at some point you do need return on investment, and we've seen this where boards have come back and said, well, actually, why are you spending so much time with this consortium when we haven't seen an ROI yet? And it may be that that comes much later down the line, but hopefully contracts will come through and there will be a return on that time commitment. As mentioned, you do need opportunities as well to keep people interested in the consortia, to help them think and believe in the consortium that it is going to be a viable option. And equally, that's important when it comes to momentum. This poor little digger here has got a bit bogged down. It can be very easy to get bogged down in the details of the processes, of the aims, the objectives, of all the paperwork, and that's not everyone's cup of tea. So you do need people who are very committed and interested in driving forward the consortium. Maybe you need some external facilitation to help that happen, but you do need people who are going to drive that forward, and they can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and they can keep everyone on board with that. The processes are important to get in place. If you've got a time scale coming up, you might struggle to get all of these in place. If it's just a smaller consortium, it may be less of a problem, but if it's a consortium looking to bid for multiple contracts, you'll need to decide, particularly with that question we had earlier about dispute resolution, but also who's going to do what as part of the consortium, how are decisions made, how do you manage quality throughout the consortium. This is just one of the processes that one of the consortia we're working with has come up with, but this is about identifying opportunities and how they respond to those. So it could be that all 11 members of the consortium see an opportunity and all email the commissioner, which wouldn't be the most productive way of doing it. So this is seeking to get around that a little bit, and it's seeking to identify who is interested within the consortium in delivering a particular part of the bid, and then pulling together a bid team to then put that bid together, and that then comes down to choosing by vote possibly, but who will form ultimately part of that bid. We've had questions come up about people hedging their bets, so a lot of enthusiasm to join the consortium, and then at the last minute they might turn around and say, well, actually, well, what if we want to bid separately? What if we want to bid against the consortium? You have to think how you will manage that. You need to think how you will convince the commissioner. If you've got a large number of organisations, how do you manage quality over that large number? How do you minimise the risks to the commissioner? So you need to make sure that what you're building is robust and solid and is attractive to commissioners. Again, you'll need time and resources to put the consortium together, but you'll need it to pull the bid together as well. And you'll need to think how you decide on those supply chains and how you have that information in place. Tenders often come around where there's little response time to get in a invitation to tender or PQQ response. So you do need that information held centrally about who does what people's capabilities and resources are. So you probably need to harvest a lot of that beforehand, but you'll still need to harvest that throughout the process. So when it comes to the PQQ, you have to have a think about who will write it and submit it. If there's a lead bidder, are they comfortable with the level of risk being taken? And equally, are they financially sound enough to get through the pre-qualification questionnaire process? you will really have to consider that carefully, particularly if it's a much larger value contract. You will need some investment there probably to make sure that the balance sheet stacks up, for instance. And think about what evidence and policies you might need to get through the PQQ. So if you're a new organisation that you've established as a consortium, if the consortium is a new body, you may have the trouble there that you need to develop policies and procedures for that new body. You also need to develop a track record for that body. Have a think about what happens if you're not shortlisted. If as a consortium you're not shortlisted, is that because the consortium doesn't have enough quality or procedures in place, or is it because of something else? But if you're not shortlisted for one bid, might that preclude you from future bids? And the invitation to tender, again, who's going to write that? Can be a very involved process. Probably it's going to be the lead bidder, but it may not be. I think about which organisation, which individual, who's going to complete the method statements. Difficult decisions there again about who will receive what money, particularly when it comes to management fees. And you probably want some sort of subcontract agreements to cover all of that and who's going to deliver what as part of the process. The final cog on the screen today that we're going to look at is structure. We covered this quite a lot earlier. It's important, it's good to have one in place, it reassures commissioners, but we always say that form should follow function, so don't get obsessed with that early on. Think about how you'll admit any new partners into the structure, whether that's as full members or whether that's as just subcontractors. There are different options and variants out there, so do think about what is most suitable for your purposes. So there are the cogs again. Hopefully you've worked through them all and they're all starting to glow green at some point, and your consortium is looking to be in a shape to be attractive and appealing to commissioners and to bid for contracts. Just a final point here, that once you've gone through all that process, you are going to have to think about building that business case for consortium, building the business plan. Maybe you'll look at a sort of short one-page overview of priority areas for the consortium. This is just a balanced scorecard. It's just one option of doing it. One of the consortium we're working with are looking to just do a one-page action plan for the first 12 months and then do a more in-depth, detailed one once they've tested out consortium bidding. So kind of up to you how you do it, but I think it's useful that all partners know what the direction of the consortium is and what the priorities are. Okay, so that is the final slide for the day. Thank you for hanging with us the whole time. I hope you've found today useful. If there are any questions now, we'll cover those briefly and we'll be happy to get back to you with any others as well.
I can see we've just had one final question, John, and that question is, how can the lack of track record for a new consortium be managed?
Okay, and this is a common problem, particularly if you're going for a model where you set up a new company, it might be a new company limited by guarantee, and through a pre-qualification questionnaire they might look at that and run financial credit checks and come up with no results and bar you. Well, if that's the problem, you need to understand why that is. I think firstly you need discussions with commissioners early doors and to say what it is you're doing and to get around that. Secondly, try and build on the track record and experience of any partners that are part of the consortium, because collectively you will have a lot of track record. Now, if those early discussions with commissioners indicate that they won't accept a new organisation without any track record, then you may have to look, even if you've gone down the model of establishing a new bidding vehicle, a legal entity, you may have to look down the model of a lead bidder route and subcontracting that out just for that specific contract and as a means of building that track record. But hopefully as well you can pick up smaller bits of work and gradually build that track record. So over time it becomes less of an issue.
That's all the questions we've had through for this section.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Luke. Thank you for your support today. If there are any other questions, do please get in touch. I'm aware we've gone through quite a lot today, and it's been a bit of a roller coaster. There's quite a lot you can talk about when it comes to bidding consortia, but if you are interested in finding out a bit more about how Locality can support you or share any information about the work we've been involved with on bidding consortia, then do please get in touch. There's my email address on the screen. Otherwise, we hope you've enjoyed today, and hopefully we'll see you at another webinar shortly. All right, many thanks.
Thanks, John. Before we go, I'd just like to remind everyone that you will be getting a copy of these slides sent to you via email. They'll be sent out to you in the next couple of days. As I mentioned at the beginning, I've already said that we're going to be sent out the slides. You will get a copy of them. What I do want to remind you is that we do have more webinar sessions coming up, and you can find out about them on the Locality website. So you can find those at locality.org.uk/events. And I'd just like to say I hope you enjoyed the rest of your afternoon. Hope to see you at the next session. Goodbye.